Welcome back to the deep dive. Now, if you're an intermediate security practitioner, you definitely know the modern threat landscape demands, well, more than just a stack of different security products. It really needs a single, unified brain and nervous system, if you like.
That's a good way to put it, because right now, so many security operations centers are just grappling with this collection of noisy tools, siloed neighbors that just don't talk to each other properly.
Exactly. And it makes something like incident response feel like, I don't know, trying to conduct an orchestra with 4 different conductors shouting instructions. It's chaos.
That analogy, yeah, it really hits home, doesn't it? The sheer complexity of these multi-vector threats. Attackers moving seamlessly from, say, email to an endpoint, they may be pivoting to a cloud identity. Relying on those individual siloed products, it's just not sustainable anymore. You can't keep up.
No way. You need speed to beat speed.
Precisely. So organizations are having to fundamentally change their security architecture, really consolidate defense, analysis, and crucially, response.
Right. So today, that's exactly what we're doing. We are diving deep into the 4 foundational pillars that really underpin this modern unified cybersecurity defense. We're talking security information and event management, SIEM, security orchestration, automation and response, OR, endpoint detection and response, or EDR, and its evolution into extended detection and response, XDR.
Critical piece.
And finally, data loss prevention, or DLP.
Yeah, and our mission today is really to get far beyond just the textbook definitions. We want to unpack how these tools, which honestly were once completely separate islands, are now aggressively converging. They're becoming this single, proactive, and highly automated ecosystem.
That's the goal. This is where we want to deliver those aha moments for you listening. We'll show you the architectural blueprints, where the vendors are really battling it out, the market context, and what a functioning integrated SOC actually looks like in practice.
And we've got some solid sources to back this up. Deep architectural breakdowns, some real-world SR workflow examples, which are fascinating, plus those all-important market rankings for 2025, and some pretty technical details on next-gen endpoint evasion, and importantly, the countermeasures.
It is a dense stack of knowledge, absolutely. So let's get started. Let's explore that central nervous system first. The SIEM. Okay, let's unpack the granddaddy of security analytics, the SIEM. It's often defined by combining 2 kind of historical functions, right? There's security information management, SIEM.
The long-term storage part.
Yeah, for log retention, compliance, forensics, keeping stuff for ages. And then there's security event management, SIEM.
Which is the real-time correlation piece, looking for threats now.
And putting them together gives you SIEM.
Exactly. And it's a concept with real history. I mean, the term itself, SIEM, was introduced by Gartner analysts way back in 2005.
Oh, how long ago?
Yeah, it highlights that this need for centralized visibility isn't new. NIST defines it pretty simply, too. An application providing actionable information via a single interface. But its real power isn't in that simplicity. It's in its ability to handle just sheer scale, massive amounts of data.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanics then, because that's where the complexity really lies, isn't it? How does this SIEM brain actually process what must be just a colossal amount of raw network noise?
Well, it all starts with data ingestion. That's the foundation.
Right, pulling it all in.
Yeah, we're talking about collecting raw logs and events from pretty much every conceivable source. Your servers, endpoints, firewalls, network switches, definitely cloud services now. And increasingly, we're seeing logs from operational technology, OT environments too, industrial control systems and the like.
The volume must be staggering.
Oh, it is, often measured in terabytes, even petabytes per day for large organizations. But here's the thing. You can't correlate all these disparate logs unless they speak the same language.
Ah, okay. Which brings us neatly to normalization and parsing. This sounds like a crucial transformation phase.
Absolutely critical. You have to take all these chaotic, inconsistent log formats. Think about an ISO web server log, a Cisco firewall log, maybe an Okta identity log. They all look totally different. You got to convert them into a single standardized, structured schema, a common format.
Makes sense.
And then, often, this structured data gets enhanced. We call it enrichment. You add context, like maybe results from a threat intelligence lookup on an IP address, or geolocation data for that IP, or specific user identity details pulled from Active Directory, adding that context right into the log entry itself. This structure, this enrichment, that's what makes the whole system usable for analysis.
Gotcha. And that standardization, that common language, that's the prerequisite for the really strategic core of the platform, the correlation engine. This is where the SIEM starts connecting the dots, yeah, detecting those multi-step attacks.
The correlation engine is the SIEM's strategic value. That's where the intelligence lies. And it uses multiple detection methods. Yes, you still got your traditional signature-based rules looking for known bad stuff, but increasingly, SIEM relies on more advanced analysis, particularly things like user and entity behavior analytics, UEBA, and pretty sophisticated AI and machine learning techniques.
Okay, let's pause on UEBA for a second. That feels like a really key piece of modern SIEM, going beyond just simple static rules. How exactly does UEBA work? How does it build that baseline and then spot the deviation?
Yeah, UEBA is fascinating because it's adaptive. It doesn't rely on pre-written rules for everything. Instead, it spends time, could be weeks or even months, just silently monitoring. It watches every user and every device, the entity part, across the network to build up a detailed profile of what normal behavior looks like for that specific user or that specific device.
So my normal might be different from your normal.
Exactly. Your profile might include your typical login times, the servers or files you usually access, how much data you normally transfer, even the common geographical locations you log in from. Once that baseline is established, the machine learning model is constantly comparing current activity against it.
Okay, so let's take an example. Say I'm a financial analyst. I usually log in between, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., mostly from the office IP, and I access SharePoint and our finance database. What happens if the SIEM suddenly sees my account logging in at 2 a.m. from an IP address in, say, Eastern Europe, and it starts trying to download the entire customer database via FTP?
Bang! That's the deviation. The UEB algorithm flags that instantly and scores it as highly anomalous. Why? Because it violates multiple dimensions of your established baseline. The time is wrong, the location is impossible, the protocol, FTP, might be unusual for you, and the volume of data access is way outside your norm.
So it's not looking for a known virus signature. It's looking for behavior that's just weird for me.
Precisely. It's looking for the unusual. And this complements the classic correlation rules SIEMs still use, like brute force detection, flagging too many failed login attempts in a short time. Or another classic is impossible travel. You know, your account logs in from Sydney and then 5 minutes later from London. Physically impossible. The system flags these statistically unlikely or impossible human actions.
Okay, that makes sense. And beyond just spotting threats in real time, the SIEM is also that crucial source of truth for compliance audits and for digging into incidents after they happen, right? Forensics.
Exactly right. For compliance mandates, think GDPR, HPI, PCI DSS, the ability to store, search, and report on historical log data is absolutely non-negotiable. Regulations often require log retention for years. 6 years or even more isn't uncommon for forensics purposes.
6 years, wow.
Yeah. And if a breach does occur, analysts will dive deep into that historical SIEM data. They use it to reconstruct the attacker's entire timeline. From the very first foothold, maybe a phishing click, all the way through lateral movement, privilege escalation, right up to the point of data exfiltration. It's the incident's diary.
Gotcha. Okay, let's turn to the market then. For our intermediate practitioner audience, knowing the major players is important. The 2025 rankings, you said, show a familiar face, but also a fierce challenger. Who's dominating the SIEM space right now?
Well, the top 3 consistently ranked SIEMs are Splunk Enterprise Security, Microsoft Sentinel, and IBM Curadar. Splunk still holds a commanding legacy presence. Estimates put its market share around 47.73%. That's huge.
Nearly half the market. What makes Splunk so dominant?
It's generally praised for its incredibly powerful and flexible search language, SPL, its scalability, and a really robust app marketplace for integrations and extensions. It's been the gold standard for a long time. However, the primary challenger snapping at its heels is Microsoft Sentinel. It holds around 13.69% of the market currently, but that number is growing and growing rapidly. IBM QRadar is a strong third, known for its analytical capabilities too.
Okay, but that big gap, Splunk's almost 50% versus Sentinel's, say, 14%. It does raise a critical question, doesn't it? Given that Sentinel is cloud native, born in Azure, and it's tightly integrated into that massive Microsoft 365 and Azure ecosystem that, let's face it, most large enterprises are already heavily invested in, is Splunk's dominance really sustainable? Or are we just seeing a big legacy footprint that hasn't fully migrated yet, and the gravity of the cloud-native approach is going to inevitably pull users towards Sentinel?
That is the key point of friction in the SIEM market right now. You hit the nail on the head. Splunk is definitely benefiting from its massive existing install base and its reputation. Lots of trained analysts, lots of existing investment. But the operational efficiency you get with Sentinel, especially its ability to ingest native Microsoft logs like Azure AD, Defender, Office 365, often at a significantly lower cost and complexity compared to pulling them into a third-party tool like Splunk.
Mm.
That's a huge gravitational pull.
The integration and cost factors.
Absolutely. The future seems to be tilting pretty strongly towards that cloud-native approach, especially for organizations heavily invested in Azure. The total cost of ownership discussion is becoming central.
And that leads us perfectly into the next-gen SIEM trends. What does that cloud-native architecture actually look like under the hood? What's changing?
Well, probably the biggest architectural shift is the move away from traditional relational databases for storing all that log data. Instead, they're embracing big data paradigms, specifically using NoSQL data lakes. Think technologies like Elasticsearch, which we'll touch on later, or similar data lake architectures.
Why is that shift so important? What's the advantage of a NoSQL data lake over a traditional database for logs?
Two main reasons: flexibility and cost-effective scale. NoSQL data lakes typically offer schema on read. This means you don't necessarily have to rigidly predefine the exact structure of every single log type before you ingest it. This reduces the upfront management overhead, especially when dealing with constantly changing cloud log sources.
Okay, more flexible ingestion.
Right. And perhaps more importantly, these architectures are just fundamentally better and more cost-effective at handling the sheer volume, velocity, and variety of modern security logs, especially from cloud environments, compared to older relational database models. But the ultimate goal here, the real next-gen trend, is convergence. We're seeing SIEM platforms increasingly integrating SOAR capabilities directly into the SIEM itself, moving beyond just alerting towards enabling immediate autonomous response.
That integration, that convergence, is the perfect segue to our next pillar. SOAR. So if SOAR is the brain providing the visibility and correlation, then SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response, is like the highly trained muscle system that executes the immediate action plan.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And it's important we define those three components clearly, because they often get used interchangeably, but they are distinct. Automation is the simplest part. It's about executing a single repetitive task without human intervention. Think like automatically blocking a known malicious file hash reported by threat intel. One task.
Okay, simple automation.
Then you have orchestration. This is the really critical coordination layer. It's about connecting and controlling multiple disparate security tools.
Yeah.
Your EDR, your firewall, your threat intel platform, your ticketing system, making them work together in a coordinated sequence to achieve a unified goal. That's the conducting the orchestra part.
Got it. Connecting the dots between tools.
And finally, response. This encapsulates the entire incident management lifecycle facilitated by a SOAR. From the initial alert triage and enrichment, through investigation, containment, eradication, and finally reporting and closure. SOAR platforms often provide case management features to help with this.
Strategically, this all boils down to speed and efficiency, right? What are the measurable benefits that really justify the often significant investment in a SOAR platform?
It is absolutely, fundamentally about time. Producing dwell time. SOAR helps drastically cut down two key metrics that every SOC tracks religiously. First is mean time to detect, or MTTD. How? Because SOAR can automatically sift through the high volume of alerts from the SIEM, enrich them with context from other tools, and discard the noise far faster than a human analyst ever could. It helps you find the real threat quicker.
Okay, so faster detection by cutting noise.
And second, and arguably even more crucial, it massively lowers the mean time to respond, MTTR. By automating those containment and remediation actions, blocking an IP, isolating a host, disabling a user account, it takes action in seconds or minutes, not hours or days.
And in cybersecurity, that response time delta. It can be the difference between a minor incident and a catastrophic breach.
Absolutely. A long MTTR equals higher financial damage, greater reputational harm, more data lost. Speed is everything in response.
And the core architecture enabling the speed is entirely driven by playbooks. You mentioned these earlier. They're essentially the automated, structured workflows that replace the old, often inconsistent, manual runbooks.
Playbooks are the absolute heart and soul of SOAR. They're these predefined, automated workflows. Think of them like digital flowcharts with built-in logic. They get triggered by specific inputs, usually a high-fidelity alert push from a SIEM or an XDR platform, or maybe a new indicator of compromise, IOC, from a threat intelligence feed.
And they're not just linear. They can adapt.
Exactly. They rely heavily on conditional logic, complex if this then that else do something else decisions. This allows the playbook to adapt the response based on the specific context of the incident it's handling. Is the affected machine a critical server? Is the user a VIP? The playbook can branch accordingly.
Okay, for an intermediate practitioner looking at how this actually works, how do these playbooks physically connect to all those different security tools you mentioned, the EDR, the firewall, the ticketing system? It sounds complex.
It relies almost universally on APIs, application programming interfaces. That's the glue. Specifically, modern SOAR platforms rely heavily on REST APIs. Most modern security tools expose their functionality via REST APIs, allowing them to be controlled programmatically.
So the SOAR tool is basically making API calls to other tools.
Precisely. The architecture usually includes a visual workflow builder, often a drag-and-drop interface, like Shuffle SOAR uses, which allows the security analyst to map out the logical steps of the playbook visually. Behind the scenes, when the playbook runs, the SOAR tool is making authenticated REST API calls to the EDR to isolate a host, or to the firewall, like SipSense via its REST API, to block an IP, or to ServiceNow to create an incident ticket.
So understanding how APIs work, particularly REST APIs, is pretty fundamental to actually building and leveraging SOAR effectively.
Absolutely essential knowledge for anyone working with SOAR.
Okay, let's make this more concrete. Let's walk through some real-world use cases. High volume, high fatigue alerts like phishing emails seem like a perfect candidate for SR automation. Take us through a typical phishing response playbook.
Yeah, phishing is where SR delivers massive, immediate returns on investment because the volume is just overwhelming for manual teams. So the playbook typically gets triggered by an alert from the secure email gateway, something like suspicious email detected. Step one is usually triage and enrichment. The SOAR playbook automatically extracts all the key indicators, any URLs in the email body, hashes of attachments, the sender's IP address and domain. It then instantly checks these IOCs against multiple external threat intelligence feeds, virus total, abuse IPDB, domain reputation services, etc., and also internal watch lists.
So finding out immediately if anything is known bad.
Exactly. Step two is validation. If an attachment is present, the playbook can automatically submit it to a sandbox environment, like Cuckoo Sandbox, or a commercial one, to safely detonate it and observe its behavior. For URLs, it might use a URL scanning service. It can also perform checks on the sender's domain looking for those subtle similarity spoofs, like using R instead of M, Microsoft.com.
Okay, so it's done its checks. Let's say the verdict comes back. Definitely malicious. What happens next?
Step 3. Containment and remediation. This is where the conditional logic kicks in. Based on the findings, the playbook branches to execute a series of automated actions via API calls. It could block the malicious URL across the corporate web proxy. It could instruct the EDR tool to isolate any endpoints where the user might have clicked the link or opened the attachment. It can even trigger a command via the Email Gateways API to search for and delete that specific malicious email from all user inboxes across the entire organization, preventing further clicks.
Wow. That entire process, enrichment, sandboxing, blocking, isolating, deleting, which might take a human analyst, what, 30 minutes? An hour even if they're busy?
Easily. Could be longer if they have a backlog.
Right.
The SR playbook does it in seconds, maybe a couple minutes if sandboxing is involved.
Mm-hmm.
Fully automated. We saw a note that Zensar's cybersecurity team, for instance, uses codeless playbooks with over 200 integrations specifically to accelerate this exact type of phishing response. It's a game changer for SOC efficiency.
That is remarkable time saving and risk reduction. Okay, let's look at another common threat, maybe one originating from the detection side. Say an RDP brute force attempt detected by an XDR system. How would SR handle that?
Yeah, another great example showing that tight integration between detection, XDR SIEM, and response SOAR. So the XDR platform detects an unusually high rate of failed RDP login attempts against a specific server, or maybe a successful login from an anomalous location, and it sends a high-fidelity alert to the SICAR platform. The SOAR playbook kicks off. First step, initial containment. It might immediately use the firewall API to block the source IP address launching the attack. Concurrently, it might interact with Active Directory or the identity provider via API to temporarily disable the user account being targeted, or at least force a password reset to prevent successful compromise.
Okay, immediate bleeding stopped. Then what? Investigation.
Exactly. The playbook then moves into the investigation phase. It can trigger the EDR agent on the targeted server to perform a deeper forensic scan, looking for any signs of persistence mechanisms, suspicious processes, or files dropped. It can query logs from the SIEM for that user's recent activity across other systems, looking for signs of lateral movement.
And how does threat intelligence fit into this investigation phase of the playbook?
It's crucial. The playbook automatically takes any IOCs discovered the attacking IP, any malware hashes found by the EDR, and queries external threat intelligence feeds again. But it also does something smarter. It tries to correlate the observed attacker behaviors, the specific tools used, the commands run, the techniques identified by the EDR with known attacker tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs. And critically, it automatically maps these discovered TTPs to the industry standard ITER ATT and CK framework.
Ah, okay. Why is mapping to MITRE, ATT, and CK so valuable within an automated playbook?
Because it provides immediate context about the likely adversary and their potential objectives. Knowing the TTPs helps the playbook, and any human analyst reviewing the case, understand what the attacker was trying to achieve. For example, credential access, persistence, defense evasion, and what their potential next steps might be. Based on this enriched context, the playbook's conditional logic can then make a more informed decision. Does it need to escalate to full endpoint blocking and a Tier 3 analyst review? Or was the initial containment, IP block password reset, sufficient, allowing the playbook to resolve the incident automatically?
That's really intelligent automation. Now, you mentioned earlier, and this is interesting, that SOAR isn't just for security incidents. It can actually revolutionize general IT operations too, like user provisioning. How does that work, and why is it relevant to security?
Yeah, provisioning automation is a fantastic, often overlooked non-security use case for SOAR, but it has significant security benefits, mainly around enforcing least privilege from day one. Think about onboarding a new employee. Typically, a request is raised in the IT service management platform, like ServiceNow or Jira Service Management. This request can trigger a SOAR playbook. The playbook then orchestrates a whole series of complex cross-system actions.
Such as?
Okay, deep breath. User account creation in Active Directory. Assigning the correct role-based security groups, not just making them domain admin. Provisioning a mailbox in Exchange or Google Workspace. Deploying the necessary standard software build to the new hire's assigned laptop via an endpoint management tool. Granting access with least privilege only to the specific applications required for their role, maybe access to the HR system, specific finance shares, etc. And finally, notifying HR, the hiring manager, and the user themselves that everything is set up and ready to go.
And the security benefit there is consistency and avoiding human error.
Exactly. It removes the manual steps where someone might accidentally grant excessive permissions just to get it working quickly. The playbook enforces the defined policy every single time, ensuring least privilege from the start, which significantly reduces the potential attack surface if that account ever gets compromised.
Makes perfect sense. And you mentioned firewall changes too. Automating those, which are often a source of misconfiguration and risk.
Precisely. Network and security teams are often buried under firewall rule change requests. These can also be initiated via the ITSM system. A developer needs port 8243 open temporarily to a test server. They submit a ticket. The SOAR playbook picks it up. It can automatically validate the request against corporate policy as the source IP internal. Is the destination server correctly tagged? Is the requested port allowed for this type of system? If everything checks out, the playbook uses the firewall management system's API, like Palo Alto Panorama or Checkpoint Management, to apply the specific temporary configuration change. It logs the change, links it back to the original ticket, and potentially even sets a reminder or automates the rule removal after the approved period.
Again, minimizing manual errors, ensuring consistency, maintaining an audit trail, and speeding up the whole change management process significantly.
It's all about embedding security and compliance into the operational workflows.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the detection layer itself, specifically on the endpoint. EDR and its successor, XDR. You hear the old adage that the firewall was the perimeter, but today, with remote work, cloud applications, BYOD, the perimeter isn't really the network edge anymore, is it? It's effectively decentralized down to every single device an employee uses.
Oh, absolutely. The endpoint laptops, desktops, servers, even mobile devices now is undeniably the new perimeter. It's where users interact with data, where initial compromises often happen via phishing or malware. Securing the endpoint is paramount, and we've seen a really rapid evolution in endpoint security technology to try and keep pace.
Take us through that evolution briefly.
Well, it started with traditional antivirus, right? AV was almost entirely signature-based. It looked for known patterns of malicious code. Reactive, essentially. If it hadn't seen it before, it probably missed it.
Okay, classic AV. Limited.
Then we evolved to Endpoint Protection Platforms, or EPP. EPP started adding more layers, things like personal firewalls, maybe some basic heuristics, host intrusion prevention systems, HIPS, and importantly, centralized management. But fundamentally, EPPs were still largely focused on preventing known threats before execution, still somewhat reactive.
And the big game changer, the shift towards proactive detection and response, that was EDR.
Exactly. Endpoint detection and response. EDR represented a fundamental shift in philosophy. It acknowledged that perfect prevention is impossible. Some threats will get through. So the focus shifted to continuous monitoring and detection of malicious activity as it happens or even after it happens, looking far beyond just static file signatures. And critically, providing the tools to respond to those detections directly on the endpoint.
So EDR agents, they're collecting much more data than traditional AV/EPP. What kind of telemetry are we talking about?
They're incredibly deep data collectors. Think of them as flight data recorders for the endpoint. They provide this rich stream of telemetry, far beyond just did this file execute. They monitor things like process execution chains, which process launched which other process, detailed file system modifications, creates, deletes, renames, all network connections originating from or terminating on the endpoint, memory dumps for analysis, critical Windows API calls being made by applications, user login logout activity, registry changes. Just a huge amount of granular detail.
And it's this constant stream of rich, detailed data that becomes the lifeblood for advanced detection techniques, right?
Absolutely. That telemetry feeds the EDR's detection engines.
So how does EDR actually use that telemetry to catch threats that traditional EPP would miss? You mentioned it's about monitoring dynamic behavior.
It generally relies on three core advanced methodologies, often used in combination. First, you still have heuristic analysis. This uses algorithms and mathematical models to score the likelihood that a file or process is malicious based on its inherent characteristics and behaviors, even if it's a brand new, never-before-seen threat. Looking for suspicious traits.
Okay, heuristics. Looking for suspicious characteristics.
Second, and increasingly important, is behavioral detection. This is where AI and machine learning models really shine, similar to UEBA in SIEM, but focused on the endpoint. The EDR learns a baseline of normal activity for that specific endpoint and flags significant deviations or statistically anomalous patterns in process behavior, network traffic, or file access.
Looking for the unusual again, but at the machine level.
Right. And the third one, which is particularly powerful against fileless malware and sophisticated attacks, is process behavior monitoring.
Explain that one. What's it looking for?
This focuses specifically on analyzing the relationships between processes. It looks for suspicious parent-child process relationships. A classic textbook example is monitoring the execution of, say, winword.exe, Microsoft Word. Under normal circumstances, Word might launch other expected processes. But if winword.exe suddenly, unexpectedly, spawns a command shell, cmd.exe, or executes a PowerShell script, PowerShell.exe. That's a highly unusual and suspicious relationship.
Because Word shouldn't normally be launching command prompts.
Exactly. That pattern is often indicative of an exploit being successful within Word, example via a malicious macro, or some form of process injection trying to execute commands under the guise of a legitimate process. The EDR flags this contextual anomaly instantly.
Okay, so EDR has these powerful detection methods, but of course the adversaries don't stand still. They're constantly adapting. For our intermediate audience, they really need to understand what they're up against. What are the key evasion techniques attackers are using right now to try and slip past modern EDR solutions?
Yeah, this is a critical area for defenders to study. The cat and mouse game is intense here. There are probably three critical categories of evasion techniques that analysts really must understand. First up is process injection techniques. This is a broad category, but the goal is always the same. Run malicious code within the memory space of a legitimate, trusted process.
Hiding in plain sight, basically.
Exactly. Common techniques here include things like process hollowing, where you create a legitimate process in a suspended state, hollow out its memory, inject your malicious code, and then resume it. Or reflective DLL injection, where you load a malicious DLL directly into the memory of another process without it ever having to be written to the disk.
Why is avoiding the disk so important?
Because many traditional AV/EPP scans and even some EDR functions are heavily focused on scanning files on disk. If your malware only ever exists in memory, it can potentially evade those scans entirely. These are often called fileless attacks.
Okay, so process injection to hide the code. What's the second major evasion technique?
This one targets the EDR's monitoring mechanism itself, hooking bypass.
How does that work? What are hooks?
Okay, so fundamentally, many EDR systems work by placing hooks on critical Windows API functions, especially within the operating system kernel, like end-to-create file, end-to-write virtual memory, etc. These hooks allow the EDR to intercept and inspect the calls being made by applications before they reach the OS kernel. It's how they get visibility into process behavior.
Right, they insert themselves into the communication chain.
Correct. Sophisticated malware knows this. So it actively tries to detect the presence of these EDR hooks. And if it finds them, it might attempt to remove them, unhooking, or overwrite them with its own code, effectively blinding the EDR to its subsequent malicious actions.
That sounds pretty advanced.
It is. And worse still, attackers are increasingly using techniques like direct system calls or syscall obfuscation. This involves bypassing those high-level, commonly hooked Windows API functions altogether and invoking the underlying kernel functions, syscalls, directly. This can allow them to operate under the radar of EDRs that primarily rely on user mode API hooking.
Wow, okay. Operating beneath the EDR's main sensors. And the third technique, you mentioned this one earlier, the groan-inducing one.
LOL bins, living off the land binaries, or sometimes LOLBS, binaries and scripts.
Using the system's own tools against it.
Precisely. This is where attackers leverage legitimate, signed, trusted operating system executables and scripts that are already present on the target system to perform malicious actions. Think tools like rundle32.exe, regsvr32.exe, searchutil.exe, mshht.exe, or the ever-powerful PowerShell. They use these trusted tools to download payloads, execute code, exfiltrate data, or achieve persistence.
And why is this so effective at evading EDR?
Because the executable itself, PowerShell.exe for instance, is perfectly legitimate and signed by Microsoft. Signature-based detection is completely blind to this. Application whitelisting might allow it too. This forces the EDR to rely almost purely on that behavioral context monitoring. We talked about spotting how PowerShell is being used, e.g. downloading obfuscated code from the internet and executing it in memory, rather than just seeing that PowerShell ran. It makes detection much harder.
Okay, so attackers are injecting into processes, bypassing hooks, and using legitimate tools. The fight is getting tougher. What countermeasures are modern EDR vendors deploying to fight back against these sophisticated evasions? We touched on kernel monitoring and hardware security earlier.
Yeah, the defense is having to move deeper and deeper into the operating system stack and even into the hardware itself. Kernel-based monitoring is one key approach. Instead of just hooking user mode APIs, the EDR vendor installs kernel mode drivers. Operating at the same privilege level as the core OS gives them a much more authoritative and tamper-resistant view to spot things like illicit process manipulation, direct syscalls, or attempts to unhook critical functions.
Getting closer to the core OS functions.
Right, but the real cutting edge of defense here is leveraging hardware-based security features built into modern CPUs and chipsets. Two big ones are virtualization-based security, VBS from Microsoft, and Intel's control flow enforcement technology, CET.
Okay, let's break those down. How does VBS provide protection for the EDR? It sounds like it creates some kind of abstraction layer.
It does exactly that. VBS, which often utilizes the same Hyper-V hypervisor technology that powers virtual machines, creates a secure, isolated execution environment within Windows. Think of it like a tiny, highly protected virtual machine running alongside the main OS kernel. Critical security processes, like parts of Windows Defender or a third-party EDR's core monitoring components, can be run inside this secure VBS-protected container.
And why is that beneficial?
Because even if an attacker manages to compromise the main operating system kernel, which is usually game over the critical EDR processes, and their sensitive data, like detection logic or cryptographic keys, are still running in this hardware-isolated virtualized container. They are protected from tampering, inspection, or unhooking attempts originating from the potentially compromised main kernel. It raises the bar for attackers significantly.
Very clever, using virtualization for defense. And what about Intel CET? What kind of attacks does that prevent?
Intel CET is specifically designed to mitigate a class of memory corruption exploits known as control flow hijacking attacks. This includes common exploit techniques like return-oriented programming, ROP, and jump-oriented programming, JOP. In these attacks, the adversary doesn't inject their own code directly. Instead, they cleverly find small snippets, gadgets, of existing, legitimate code within the application's memory space and chain them together in a malicious sequence by manipulating the program's control flow, for example, overwriting return addresses on the stack.
So they're hijacking the program's own code to do bad things.
Exactly. CET combats this by adding hardware-level checks. It maintains a shadow stack to validate return addresses, preventing ROP attacks, and uses indirect branch tracking to ensure that jumps and calls only land on legitimate expected destinations, thwarting JOP attacks. Essentially, it enforces much stricter rules on how programs are allowed to transfer execution control, making these sophisticated exploit techniques much harder, if not impossible, to pull off reliably.
Fascinating stuff. Hardware stepping in to protect software. Okay, that level of endpoint protection is vital, but it leads us nicely to XDR, extended detection and response. You could say EDR solved the visibility problem on the endpoint, but modern attacks cross multiple domains. XDR seems aimed at solving the visibility and response problem across the entire security architecture.
That's the perfect summary. XDR is the natural, logical evolution of EDR. The fundamental limitation of EDR was its scope. It relied solely on data collected from the endpoint. While incredibly valuable, it couldn't see the full picture of an attack that might start with an email, involve compromised cloud credentials, and then move laterally across the network before hitting the endpoint. XDR breaks down those silos. It aggregates detection, correlation, and response capabilities across the entire security fabric.
So what specific domains does XDR typically pull data from beyond just the endpoint?
The core components are usually endpoints via the EDR agent, identities, integrating with Active Directory, Azure AD, Okta, etc., to see logins, privilege changes, cloud applications and infrastructure, monitoring activity in SaaS apps like Office 365 or IES platforms like AWS Azure, email security, pulling in alerts from secure email gateways, and network traffic analysis, ingesting data from firewalls, network sensors, NDR tools.
Providing that holistic end-to-end view of the potential attack kill chain, you see the whole story.
Absolutely. XDR connects the dots much faster and more reliably. You don't just see a suspicious process running on a laptop, EDR view.
Yeah.
With XDR, you might see the initial phishing email that delivered the payload, email security data, the subsequent credential theft attempt logged by the identity provider, identity data, the attacker using those creds to access a cloud storage bucket, cloud data, and then the lateral movement attempt detected by the endpoint agent, endpoint data, all correlated together.
And that comprehensive visibility doesn't just help investigation, it enables much more effective automated response, right?
Critically important, yes. Because XDR has visibility and control points across multiple domains, its automated responses can be much more comprehensive. Instead of just isolating the endpoint and EDR action, an XDR playbook could simultaneously isolate the endpoint, disable the compromised user account in Azure AD, block the malicious file hash across all endpoints, block the command and control server's IP address at the firewall, and delete the originating phishing email from all mailboxes. A truly coordinated, multi-domain response.
Okay, this convergence is clearly powerful. XDR aggregating detection across endpoints, cloud, email, network, providing rich correlation, often with integrated SOAR-like automation capabilities built in. It inevitably raises a fundamental strategic question for our intermediate audience.
Cool.
Does the rise of comprehensive XDR ultimately make the traditional dedicated SIEM redundant? Is XDR going to eat Sam's lunch?
The multi-million-dollar or maybe multi-billion-dollar industry question right now. And the honest answer is it's nuanced. It's not quite a simple yes or
Why
no.
not? Where does SDR fall short, potentially?
XDR is absolutely superb for high-fidelity, tactical, near real-time threat detection, investigation, and response, particularly focused on correlating events along a specific attack chain. It excels at detection and response for active threats. However, traditional SIEMs still often hold advantages in a few key areas, primarily driven by scale and scope beyond immediate threat detection.
Such as?
Think about those massive long-term data retention requirements we discussed earlier, needing to store all logs, not just security alerts, for potentially 6 or more years for compliance and deep forensic analysis. XDR platforms aren't always designed or priced for that kind of petabyte-scale, multi-year raw log storage.
Okay, long-term storage is one aspect. What else?
Also, the sheer breadth of correlation. SIEMs are often used for broader operational visibility, correlating IT operational events with security events, or doing very large-scale, low and slow behavioral baselining across an entire 100,000-person organization, looking for subtle statistical trends that might not be part of an obvious attack chain, but could indicate insider risk or policy violations. And SIEMs traditionally excel at ingesting logs from a very wide, often vendor-agnostic, range of sources, including legacy systems or custom applications that might not have native XDR integrations yet.
So the picture emerging is less about XDR replacing SIEM entirely and more about them becoming complementary. Maybe XDR handles the high-speed, high-fidelity detection and response and fades its critical alerts into the SIEM for long-term storage, broader correlation, and compliance reporting.
That's increasingly the view many organizations are taking. They are becoming complementary parts of the security ecosystem. XDR provides the sharp, fast, tactical response capability, while SIEM provides the broad, deep, long-term strategic visibility and compliance engine. They work together.
And we certainly see the market leaders reflecting this convergence. Vendors like CrowdStrike with Falcon, Microsoft combining Defender XDR with Sentinel SIEM, Palo Alto Networks, Cortex XDR, and Sentinel are all pushing this integrated XDR vision, often building their own native SR-like automation layers right into the platform, like CrowdStrike's Falcon Fusion.
Exactly. That platform approach is definitely winning mindshare because the integration friction is just so much lower when the detection engine, the data correlation, and the response mechanisms are all built by the same vendor and designed to work together seamlessly from day one.
Okay, let's shift our focus now. We've talked a lot about detecting and responding to the attacker's actions, the SIEM, SOAR, EDR, XDR. Now let's talk about protecting the actual asset they're often after, the data itself. This brings us to our fourth pillar, data loss prevention, or DLP.
Right. DLP is fundamentally different in its focus. While the others are largely about stopping the bad guys getting in or moving around, DLP is focused purely on preventing the unauthorized disclosure, leakage, or exfiltration of sensitive data, whether it's accidental or malicious.
So it's less about the threat actor and more about the data's location and movement.
Precisely. DLP acts as that crucial backstop. It's vital for mitigating insider threats, which can be malicious employees deliberately stealing data or just negligent users accidentally emailing the wrong spreadsheet. And of course, it's essential for meeting regulatory compliance requirements around protecting sensitive information. Data is the crown jewel, and DLP is supposed to be the mechanism that ensures its integrity and limits its exposure.
We often hear about data being protected in 3 different states. Can you detail where DLP operates across those states?
Sure. DLP solutions aim to provide protection wherever sensitive data resides or travels. The 3 states are data at rest. This is data that's stored, sitting in databases, on file servers, in cloud storage repositories like SharePoint or S3 buckets, or even cached locally on endpoint hard drives. DLP tools can scan these locations to discover where sensitive data actually resides, data discovery, and apply protections like encryption or access control.
Okay, data sitting still.
Data in motion. This is data actively moving across the network. Think emails being sent, files being uploaded to websites or cloud services, data transferred via instant messaging, or even just moving between internal network segments. Network DLP appliances or agents monitor this traffic looking for sensitive data patterns.
On the move.
And finally, data in use. This is data that's actively being accessed, processed, or manipulated by applications or users on an endpoint. For example, a user copying sensitive data from a corporate document and trying to paste it into a personal webmail client, or trying to print a confidential file, or saving it to a USB drive. Endpoint DLP agents monitor these actions.
So DLP needs visibility into all 3 states to be truly effective, and the architecture has to reflect those different locations, right?
Correct. You typically deploy DLP capabilities in multiple places. There's network DLP, usually implemented as physical or virtual appliances at network egress points to monitor outbound traffic, like email and web. Then there's endpoint DLP, which uses software agents installed directly on workstations and servers. This is critical because it can monitor and control data actions even when the device is off the corporate network. Think a remote worker trying to copy files to a USB stick at home. And increasingly important is cloud DLP. This is often integrated with cloud access security brokers, CASBs, or is built directly into SaaS platforms themselves, like Microsoft Purview Information Protection in Office 365, to enforce DLP policies on data stored and shared within cloud services like Teams, Slack, or Salesforce.
Okay, that covers the where. Now let's talk about a major challenge with DLP, something the original script didn't really dive into, but which anyone who's worked with it knows: the pain of false positives. DLP tools can be notoriously noisy, constantly flagging legitimate actions and frustrating users. How do organizations get past that noise and make DLP effective without driving everyone crazy?
Ah, yes, the false positive problem. It is, without doubt, the single biggest challenge in successful DLP implementation and adoption. If your DLP is constantly blocking legitimate business workflows, users will either find ways around it or productivity will grind to a halt. The key is moving beyond overly simplistic, purely content-aware detection methods.
Okay, explain the difference. What's content-aware versus what's the alternative?
Content-aware DLP primarily looks inside the data itself for specific patterns or signatures. For example, using regular expressions, regex, to look for patterns that look like credit card numbers, 16 consecutive digits, social security numbers, 9 digits, or specific keywords like confidential or project chimera. The problem is, these patterns often appear in legitimate contexts. That 9-digit number might just be an internal project ID, not an SSN. That confidential tag might be on a non-sensitive internal memo. This leads to heaps of false positives.
Okay, so content awareness is prone to errors. What's the better approach?
The better approach is context-aware DLP. This doesn't just look at the content. It looks at the surrounding circumstances, the metadata, and the context of the action. It asks questions like, who is accessing this data? What application are they using? Where is the data coming from, e.g. a classified SharePoint site? Where is it trying to go, e.g. a personal Gmail address, an external USB drive, an unsanctioned cloud storage site? Is this user even authenticated properly? How much data are they trying to move? By combining the content analysis, what is the data, with this rich contextual analysis, who, what, where, when, how, you can build much more intelligent and accurate DLP policies.
Give me an example of that context in action.
Sure. A purely content-aware rule might block any spreadsheet containing columns that look like PII. A context-aware rule would be smarter. It might only block that same spreadsheet if it contains validated PII, using more advanced detection that just rejects, and it's being emailed by a user outside the finance department, and the recipient is an external personal email address, and it's happening at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. See the difference? The context drastically reduces the likelihood of it being a legitimate business action, thus reducing false positives while still catching the truly risky behavior.
That makes a huge amount of sense. Focus on the risky context, not just the data pattern. Now, compliance remains a massive driver for DLP adoption. Which specific regulations really necessitate this level of granular data tracking and control?
Pretty much all the major global data privacy and security regulations have elements that drive the need for DLP. Think Europe's GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, the U.S. Healthcare Regulation, HEPA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the Payment Card Standard, PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and state-level laws like the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, and its successor, CPRA. All of these require organizations to demonstrate that they know where their sensitive data, like PII, PHI financial data is, who is accessing it, and that they have technical controls in place to prevent its unauthorized disclosure or loss. DLP acts as a key technical enforcement mechanism to meet these requirements, for example, preventing unencrypted health records from being emailed outside the organization's secure perimeter.
Okay, compliance is huge.
Yeah.
But beyond just ticking regulatory boxes, you mentioned the core purpose is often protecting the company's own secrets, intellectual property.
Absolutely. Protecting trade secrets, proprietary algorithms, source code, sensitive financial projections, merger and acquisition documents. This is often the primary business driver for DLP, especially in competitive industries like tech, pharma, or finance. DLP uses more advanced techniques here like exact data matching, EDM. This allows an organization to take a fingerprint or hash of specific sensitive database records, like a customer list or employee salary data. The DLP system can then detect if any data exactly matching those records tries to leave the environment, even if it's just a single record pasted into an email.
So it knows the actual sensitive data, not just patterns.
Exactly. Or techniques like document fingerprinting, where you fingerprint entire sensitive documents like a specific financial report template or a legal contract. The DLP can then detect if that exact document, or even just significant portions of it, are being moved inappropriately. These techniques are much more precise than the simple keyword or regex matching for IP protection.
And this precision is also key for mitigating the dreaded insider threat, right? Spotting anomalous internal user behavior.
Yes. DLP is arguably the primary technical control for mitigating data loss from insiders, both malicious and accidental. It monitors for highly anomalous behavior patterns that might indicate risk. For example, a user who has just resigned suddenly accessing large volumes of customer relationship data they don't normally touch, or someone trying to change file permissions on sensitive folders, or initiating a massive data transfer to a personal cloud storage account, or an unapproved USB drive late at night. Well-tuned DLP policies are designed to detect and, crucially, block that kind of suspicious activity in real time before the sensitive data actually leaves the organization's control.
Okay, so if an organization is embarking on a DLP implementation, or maybe trying to improve an existing one that's causing too much friction, what's the best, most actionable advice you'd give them to ensure it's effective but also usable?
Several critical best practices come to mind immediately. First, and this is often overlooked in heterogeneous environments, prioritize cross-platform solution parity. If your workforce uses both Windows and Mac OS devices, you absolutely need a DLP solution that provides the same level of visibility and control features across both operating systems. Data is just as sensitive on a MacBook Pro as it is on a Windows desktop. Don't accept feature gaps between OS agents. And consider Linux too, if it's prevalent in your developer or server environments.
Good point. Ensure consistency everywhere. What else?
Second, given the massive shift to remote and hybrid work, ensure your chosen solution and policies fully support the remote work policy. The endpoint DLP agent must function effectively, enforcing policies consistently, whether the device is connected to the corporate network, on a VPN, or completely offline at a coffee shop. Data loss doesn't only happen when you're in the office.
Makes sense. Protect the data wherever the user is. Now, what about peripherals? USB drives are a classic data leakage vector. Blocking them entirely is often the knee-jerk reaction, but as you said, that can kill productivity for legitimate use cases.
Right. Blanket blocking is often impractical. This is where granular control over peripherals becomes essential. A good DLP solution shouldn't just offer ONOFF for USB ports. It should allow you to implement policies like MIF to farm, allow only company-issued encrypted USB drives, whitelisting specific device IDs, block all other consumer-grade drives, maybe allow read-only access but block write access for certain user groups, and critically, enforce encryption. Implement a policy that dictates any file transferred to an approved removable media device must be automatically encrypted using strong, centrally managed corporate encryption keys. That way, even if the approved USB drive is lost or stolen, the data on it remains protected and useless to unauthorized parties. It's about enabling secure usage, not just blocking everything.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. We've established the 4 pillars, SIEM providing that broad visibility and correlation, SO delivering the automated speed and consistent response, EDR and now XDR securing that decentralized perimeter with deep telemetry and actionability, and DLP acting as the final guardian of data integrity itself. The core thesis, the main argument of this deep dive, is that the future isn't about having the best tool in each silo anymore. It lies in their interdependence, how they work together as a system.
That synergy is absolutely undeniable now. It's where the real value multiplication happens. And probably the most critical and mature integration we see today is between SIEM and SOAR. As we discussed, the SIEM's ability to perform complex log correlation across vast datasets is incredibly powerful. But it's frankly useless if the Security Operations Center at SOC team is grounding in the resulting alerts. Alert fatigue is real, it's debilitating. SOAR acts as that intelligent automation layer, stepping in to handle realistically 80% to maybe even 90% of the routine low-level alert triage and initial response actions. It automatically filters the noise, enriches the real threats, and executes those initial containment steps we talked about.
Freeing up the human analyst to focus their precious time and brain power on the truly complex, novel threats that require genuine investigation and critical thinking.
Exactly. It directly reduces MTTR for the bulk incidents, addresses the alert fatigue problem, and allows the SOC to scale its effectiveness without necessarily scaling headcount linearly. That SIEM plus SOAR combination is foundational for a modern, efficient SOC.
Now, we also discussed the broader strategic shift towards these unified security platforms, particularly driven by the rise of XDR. And this inevitably brings up that classic IT procurement and architecture debate. Platform versus best of breed. What are the trade-offs organizations need to weigh up here?
Yeah, it's a really high-stakes decision with significant long-term implications for cost, complexity, and capability. The traditional best-of-breed approach has its appeal. It allows you to meticulously select what you perceive to be the absolute market leader, the most feature-rich product in each individual category. Maybe you pick Splunk for SIEM because you love its search power, CrowdStrike for EDR and XDR for its detection capabilities, Proofpoint for email security, and a niche vendor like ForcePoint or Netscope for DLP CASB.
So you get potentially superior functionality within each specific silo?
Potentially, yes. You get the point solution that excels at its one job. However, this approach almost inevitably leads to massive integration friction. You're left trying to stitch together products from multiple vendors that were never designed to work together natively. This means dealing with complex, sometimes poorly documented APIs, needing custom development or middleware for translation, facing challenges with inconsistent data formats between tools, dealing with broken integrations when one vendor updates their API. It creates a huge operational burden and often results in a system that's less than the sum of its parts because the connections are brittle or incomplete.
Okay, that's the pain of best-of-breed integration. What's the argument for the alternative, the unified platform or XDR-centric approach?
The primary driver for the unified platform approach, often championed by vendors like Microsoft with its Defender Sentinel Purview ecosystem, Palo Alto Networks, Cortex, CrowdStrike, Falcon Platform, Sentinel-owned, Singularity Platform, etc., is operational simplicity and speed through pre-integration.
These platforms offer streamlined management through fewer consoles. The integrations between the different modules, EDR, email security, identity protection, cloud security, sometimes SIEM/SOAR, are pre-built, robust, and maintained by the vendor. The data models are often inherently consistent across the platform. This leads to a single pane of glass experience that genuinely improves investigation speed and correlation accuracy. While a specific component within the platform might not be the absolute number one best in this narrow category compared to a niche best-of-breed player, the significant reduction in operational friction, the lower integration costs, and the inherent speed gained from having tightly interconnected detection and response systems often outweigh those marginal functional differences for many organizations.
So the market momentum is towards the platform because the operational benefits of integration often trump the features of individual point products.
That's definitely the trend we're seeing. The market is aggressively pushing the platform model precisely because of this operational efficiency and the faster time to value achieved through native integration. Total cost of ownership, TCO, often looks much better too when you factor in the hidden integration costs of best of breed.
Okay, to make this synergy and the benefits of integration crystal clear, let's dive into that specific open source integration example that was mentioned in our source material. This is really interesting because it demonstrates that achieving this kind of sophisticated closed-loop detection and response system is actually achievable without necessarily needing a hugely expensive proprietary monolithic system from a single vendor.
Yeah, this is a fantastic practical illustration of that tight feedback loop. Detect, analysis, respond, remediate. And it uses readily available, often open source or community-supported tools. So the foundation in this example starts at the network edge with pfSense. It's acting as the primary firewall, doing the basic packet filtering. But importantly, it's also running Suricata.
Suricata being the intrusion detection and prevention system, the IDSIPs.
Exactly. Suricata is a really powerful open source IDSS engine. It's inspecting the network traffic passing through the pfSense firewall, looking for known malicious signatures, protocol anomalies, threats based on rule sets like the emerging threats rules. When Suricata detects something suspicious, it generates the initial security event logs.
Okay, so Suricata on pfSense provides the initial detection events. Those events then need to get into the SIEM component for storage and analysis. How does that happen?
In this stack, they're using FileBeat. FileBeat is part of the Elastic Stack, often called the ELK stack. It's a very lightweight, efficient log forwarder or shipper. FileBeat runs on the pfSense box or pulls logs remotely, reliably collects those Suricata alert logs and potentially other pfSense logs like firewall denies, formats them slightly, and securely ships them off to the central log store.
And that central log store is...
Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is a highly scalable, distributed open-source search and analytics engine built on NoSQL principles. It's incredibly well suited for handling large volumes of time series data like logs. This serves as the core SIEM data collection and storage layer in this architecture. All the logs land here.
Got it. So pfSense, Suricata for detection, FileBeat for shipping, Elasticsearch for storage. How do analysts actually see and analyze this data?
That's where Kibana comes in. Kibana is the K in ELK. It's the visualization layer for Elasticsearch. It sits on top of the Elasticsearch data store and provides the web interface for searching, exploring, and visualizing the log data. Analysts use Kibana to build dashboards showing security trends, perform ad hoc searches through the logs, create visualizations of attack patterns, and importantly, configure alerts based on specific correlation queries within the Elasticsearch data.
Okay, so now we have the detection, Suricata, the transport FileBeat, the storage, Elasticsearch, and the analysis alerting interface, Kibana. This is essentially the SIEM part of the stack. Now, how does the SOAR component enter the loop to actually perform the automated action based on an alert from this system?
This is where ShuffleSOAR comes into play in this specific example. Shuffle is an open-source OR platform focused on automation workflows. Shuffle can be configured to continuously poll Elasticsearch for new alerts matching specific criteria. For example, severity attend to high, rule name, eat malware known CNC callback. Alternatively, Kibana's alerting feature could trigger a webhook that directly notifies Shuffle when such an alert occurs. Either way, when that specific high-fidelity correlation alert fires in the SIEM layer, let's say Suricata detected traffic matching a known malware command and control server signature, that event becomes the trigger for an automated Shuffle playbook.
Right. Walk us through the specific logic inside that Shuffle playbook. What does it actually do once triggered by that Suricata alert from Elasticsearch Kibana?
The playbook logic in this scenario is designed to be very direct and focused on immediate containment. Step 1. The playbook automatically parses the alert data received from Elasticsearch to extract the key piece of information, the malicious source IP address that triggered the suricata rule. Step 2. The playbook then uses Shuffle's built-in integration capabilities to interact with the EFSense firewall's REST API. Many modern network devices, including pfSense, often via community packages or its core API, sometimes referred to as the Unicorn API in older contexts, expose configuration controls via a REST interface. Step 3. The Shuffle playbook constructs and sends an authenticated API call to the pfSense firewall, instructing it to dynamically insert a new firewall rule. This rule will be configured to immediately block all traffic originating from that specific malicious IP address identified in Step 1.
Wow. So detection, suricata, log shipping, file beat, storage, Elasticsearch, alerting, Kibana, trigger, webhook poll, SOAR, playbook, shuffle, extract IP, command firewall, pfSense API, block IP firewall rule. That is the complete automated closed loop. Detection, analysis, command, and remediation all happening potentially within seconds without a human analyst even needing to log in or manually intervene for that initial block.
That is the very definition of a mature automated security operations capability. It demonstrates how you can tightly integrate these different functions, network security, SIEM, SOAR, to achieve rapid response. But as powerful as this is, achieving this level of sophistication requires careful planning and ongoing maintenance. Which brings us, naturally, to the common challenges that our intermediate audience must plan for when trying to implement and integrate these pillars, whether using open source or commercial tools.
What are the three biggest hurdles or pitfalls organizations typically face when they try to build this kind of integrated security ecosystem?
Okay, based on common experience, I'd say the top three are: first, complexity and cost. Don't underestimate this. These integrated systems generate, process, and store truly massive amounts of data. The cost of compute resources, storage, especially hot storage for fast querying in the cloud, and network bandwidth can often dramatically exceed initial budget projections. Furthermore, the sheer architectural complexity of managing all these interconnected components, tuning the SIEM rules, maintaining the SOAR playbooks, updating API integrations, managing the data pipelines requires a higher level of engineering talent and more dedicated time than typical IT operations might be accustomed to.
So, sticker shock on the resource consumption and needing more specialized skills. Got it. What's number 2?
Number 2 is the perpetual headache of compatibility and integration friction. Even when vendors claim standards compliance or provide APIs, getting tools from different vendors, or even different versions of tools from the same vendor sometimes, to talk to each other seamlessly is often much harder in practice than it looks on paper. You run into issues with unique or proprietary data formats, vendor-specific schemas that require translation, APIs that get deprecated or changed without warning, authentication challenges between systems. This friction can lead to incomplete data correlation, failed automation tasks, brittle integrations that break easily, and significant time spent just troubleshooting the connections between the tools rather than using them. You absolutely have to budget time for testing and maintaining these integrations.
The plumbing is harder than it looks.
Yeah.
Okay. And the third major challenge.
The third one is unfortunately almost universal across the entire cybersecurity industry right now: the skills shortage. Building, managing, and effectively using these complex integrated security solutions requires highly specialized expertise. You need people who understand SIEM query languages deeply and know how to design and code robust SOAR playbooks, and understand network protocols and grasp the intricacies of endpoint detection and evasion techniques, and can interpret threat intelligence. The list goes on. Finding individuals or even building teams with this breadth and depth of cross-functional skills is incredibly difficult. This specialized talent is rare, in high demand, and therefore expensive.
And this skilled gap is a major reason why we're seeing such a push towards
More automation, like SOAR and anal vol features within platforms, towards simplification through unified platforms, reducing the integration burden, and toward the increasing adoption of managed security services, MSSPs, or managed detection and response, MDR services. Organizations are essentially looking for ways to achieve the desired security outcomes without having to hire and retain all the necessary specialized expertise in-house. It's a major driver for outsourcing and automation strategies. #outro AJ.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into these 4 foundational pillars of modern cybersecurity. We saw how SIEM provides that essential broad visibility and long-term memory, how SAIL delivers the crucial speed, consistency, and automation for response, how EDR and XDR secure that ever-expanding decentralized perimeter with rich telemetry and direct actionability, and how DLP acts as that vital final guardian focused purely on protecting the data itself.
And the essential takeaway, the key message for you listening, really has to be the fundamental shift away from thinking about these as separate defensive products you just buy and plug in. The future, the effective security posture, lies in viewing them as components of an integrated platform ecosystem. Their true power is realized only through their interdependence, their constant communication, working together to provide a unified, resilient, and scalable defense against increasingly sophisticated threats.
So, building on that theme of integration and automation, here is the final provocation we want to leave you with to mull over. Given this powerful trend towards XDR unifying detection across endpoints, cloud, identity, and networks, and given the increasing sophistication of SOAR in automating complex remediation actions from blocking IPs and isolating hosts right through to disabling accounts and deleting emails, what security function, relying purely on human decision-making, intuition, strategic thinking, and maybe even creativity, do you think will be the single most essential, the most valuable, and the most difficult to fully automate away in the next 5 years?
Yeah, think about those higher-level functions. Where does unique human insight, context, and strategic judgment remain absolutely irreplaceable by even the smartest conditional logic or machine learning model? What requires that human spark?
Something to ponder. We'll leave that thought with you. Until next time on The Deep Dive, stay curious, keep asking questions, and keep digging deeper.